Utah, and specifically Sanpete County, was settled predominantly by Northern European immigrants. When they came, they brought their notions of animal husbandry and herding and raising livestock with them. The problem with that is that Northern Europe is not the high desert plains of the Great Basin.
In the northern Scandinavian countries, it was green mostly year-round. They had no grazing problems. Animals could go out and graze at any time. When they came to the drier parts of Utah, they thought they could do the same here. So they brought in sheep, cattle, and other livestock and thought the grazing was free and great forever. It didn't turn out to be that way. The forage was virtually wiped out.
They assumed in those initial years that the mountains and the grass and the forage value was just a renewable resource in the same way that it was in Europe. But they quickly learned that those dramatic differences in ecology and geography and watershed were not the same. It resulted in widespread decimation of the forage value of the Wasatch Plateau.
Overgrazing left the topsoil in particular very vulnerable to early spring runoff and summer storms. There are some estimates that the Wasatch Range lost anywhere between 3 and 10 feet of topsoil during those hard eras. It was an annual thing to flood the towns and flood all the canyons and all of the open plains that were here.
Towns like Ephraim and Manti literally lost their entire main street multiple times. It destroyed houses and buildings and the roads, destroyed farmland from all the sediment, rocks, boulders, and trees, flushed down through the valley floors and just rendered things completely devastated. The locals almost came to expect it, but those who had lived in the valley long enough knew this was a new thing. This did not exist before the European settlers arrived.
There became a necessity to figure out what to do to solve the problem.
It was time for them to look at the situation and say, we have clearly caused this mess and we need to do something to reverse it.
The government sent a man by the name of Art Sampson to Utah, and he set up the Great Basin Experiment Station. The Great Basin Headquarters Station, as it's called, was at 8,800 feet in a grove of aspen. They had about 10 or 12 buildings at the time, from cookhouses to bunkhouses to offices to places where they could establish and send crews out to do work there. Up the canyon, another 3 or 4 miles at just under 10,000 feet, is called the Alpine Station. This is where watershed A and B were established. There were houses set up, and it would measure the amount of soil and everything that come off without vegetation. They would go into some revegetation or planting of species to see what effect it had on reducing soil loss. And from there, the initial early plot studies, soil loss studies, seeding studies were all set up at that time.
Once the decades of research had been compiled and performed by the scientists at the experiment station across multiple states, it created a roadmap of sorts that could be followed all across the West. And so it was this really neat fusion of science and experimentation and grassroots application that gave birth to what we now know as the seed industry in the Intermountain West. We draw on the things that were learned over a century ago and say, we recognize this problem. We've seen this before, and now we know how to repair it.
It became quite apparent that the industry could not supply what the needs were for revegetation.
And so it was kind of on the heels of all these years of research and hands-on application that our father, Lloyd Stevens, decided to start his own seed company. Lloyd's own family history was connected enough to the story of the development of the Great Basin Research Station and the science and the research that came out of it, that it was a natural step for him to move into a role where he became a purveyor of seed. And his legacy continues to this day, and he's been one of the more influential people in the development of the native seed industry in the United States.